The storm swept down on the San Juan Valley, wind tearing at the tin roof, thunder shaking the very earth. And in that moment, a lone rider appeared through the rain. She wasn't begging for pity, only to live until dawn. Mateo Vargas never imagined that storm would bring him not just a runaway woman, but a fateful confrontation that would change his life forever. The wind came without warning, tearing across the San Juan Valley like a beast unchained. Tin sheets on the old feed shed clattered, the cattle bawled, and lightning cracked the ridges wide open in blinding flashes. Mateo Vargas had lived through storms before, but 7 years of silence had taught him one thing: storms never came alone. He gripped his lantern in one hand, barbed wire in the other, the rain drumming so hard it felt like nails against his back. That's when he heard it. Not the shuffle of spooked cattle, not the groan of a leaning fence post, hoofbeats, heavy, deliberate, cutting through the roar of rain. Mateo froze, every muscle tight. Out of the black mouth of the creek road came a horse, stumbling, slick with mud, its rider bent low across its neck. The lantern light caught a pale face, hair matted to skin, a dark dress plastered to a narrow frame. The mare nearly collapsed before Mateo's boots hit the mud, his hand locking around the reins just in time. The woman's eyes found his, sharp green even under lashes clumped with water. Her voice, though trembling, carried like a blade. "I'm not asking for comfort, senor. I'm asking to live until morning." For a heartbeat, the storm itself seemed to pause. Then she slipped from the saddle, light as a shadow, her boots sinking deep into the muck. Mateo's arm tightened around her waist, steadying her. The horse shuddered beside them, spent. With the storm slashing needles of rain into his back, he half led, half carried the stranger toward the adobe house. The door slammed against the wind, shutting out the storm. Inside, firelight flickered, shadows leaping across old adobe walls. She stood dripping, clutching a small case tied to her wrist with rawhide, as if the world might steal it from her. She didn't thank him. She only scanned the room like someone who had learned never to trust a closed door. And in that charged silence, Mateo Vargas knew whatever had ridden into Los Alamos that night was far more dangerous than the storm outside. The storm still raged beyond the thick adobe walls, but inside Los Alamos the air felt heavy with something far sharper than rain. Mateo Vargas set a steaming mug of canela tea in front of the stranger, watching the way her hands shook around the clay cup. She had given him her name, Camila Duarte from Monterrey, but names were only fragments. It was the silence between words that weighed most. She had not come here by chance. He could feel it in the way she sat, every muscle strung tight, her eyes never resting on one place for too long. People fleeing storms carried fear, but this was something deeper, like she was bracing for footsteps to follow, for fists to pound at the door. Mateo had lived in solitude for 7 years, burying his ghosts beneath cattlework and dust. He knew the signs of hunted people, and that was exactly what this woman was. It was near midnight when the knock came. 3 hard raps against the wood. Mateo's hand went straight to the Winchester on the wall. Camilla's head snapped up, eyes wide, her fingers white around the edge of the blanket. But the voice that followed was no stranger. "Easy, hijo. It's Ernesto." Mateo opened the door to find Don Ernesto Salgado, lantern swinging, rain dripping from his wide brim hat. The old vaquero's eyes narrowed as they landed on Camila, and in that long, steady look, Mateo felt questions unspoken but heavy as stones. "Storm's driving worse than I thought," Ernesto muttered, stepping inside. "And word in town says bandits are back in the valley. Roads aren't safe, not even for cattle." He glanced toward Camila once more, his silence carrying more suspicion than words ever could. "I'm no trouble to you, senor," Camila cut in, her voice low but clear. "Just a traveler who lost her way in the rain." Ernesto grunted, unconvinced, but said nothing. Still, when he left an hour later, the weight of his warning hung over the fire. "Not everything the storm blows in is meant to be kept," the old man had said. Mateo sat in the flicker of firelight long after, watching Camila sip her tea, her eyes fixed on the flames as though they held every answer she refused to speak. He had questions, but he also knew time had a way of dragging truth out like roots in floodwater. By dawn, the storm had broken. The San Juan Valley lay washed and gleaming under a pale sun. Mateo found tracks near the creek, 3 sets of hoofprints heading toward town. Whoever they were, they had passed close enough to see Los Alamos. To see her. When he came back, Camilla was at the stove, hair still damp, wearing one of his old shirts that hung loose on her frame. She moved like a woman trying not to look out of place and almost managing it. And then, over the clatter of pans, her secret spilled out. "I didn't run for love," she said suddenly. "I ran for the right to choose." Mateo stopped, his coffee half raised. She set her cup down, steam curling between them. "My father thinks marriage is a transaction. Don Rafael Rivas offered him land, business shares. In return, he gets me, half his age, seen 3 times, spoken to like I was already bought." Her voice was calm, but beneath it burned the fury of a life stolen. "I waited until the house was quiet, took my father's bay mare, rode until the city lights disappeared. I thought I could reach my aunt in Linares by dawn, but the storm had other plans. Turns out my riding lessons were meant for garden paths, not mountain passes." She gave a bitter half-smile, the kind that carried more pain than laughter. Mateo said nothing. He didn't need to. Truth had its own weight, and hers landed heavy in the room. But the world has a way of finding runaways. The very next morning, Lucia Vargas arrived with supplies: coffee beans, flour, meat. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, landing on Camila in Mateo's shirt, hair still damp, a plate set neatly at the table. "Didn't know you'd taken on a hand," she said dryly. "She's a guest," Mateo replied, but even he could feel how thin the word sounded. Lucia raised a brow, then set down her sack. "Town's already talking. Somebody in the cantina asked last night about a young woman on a bay mare. Green eyes, well-dressed. He bought drinks for half the room, so people talked. I'd wager the story will be up and down the valley by noon." Camilla stiffened, her knuckles tightening around her cup. "Who?" Lucia shook her head. "Didn't give a name, but money like that always has a face behind it." Mateo's jaw tightened. The man hunting her was closer than ever. By evening, the silence in Los Alamos felt different. No longer the solitude Mateo had once cherished, but a taut stillness, like the moment before a rope snaps. Camilla finished her tea and stood. "I can work," she said simply. "I won't be a burden." He studied her a long moment, then nodded. "3 conditions. Your room is yours, mine is mine. If you decide to leave, you tell me before you go. And no idle hands. You work same as I do." She didn't flinch. Agreed. It was in that quiet pact, between 2 souls, one scarred by loneliness, the other by chains, that Los Alamos began to change. But outside the adobe walls, riders still watched the ridge, whispers carried through the cantina, and the name Rafael Rivas spread like wildfire. Camilla's past wasn't fading. It was closing in. If this story gripped you, if you felt the storm, the fear, and the fire in Camilla's voice, don't let it end here. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Share this video with a friend who loves a good Wild West tale, because trust me, the fight for freedom in San Juan Valley has only just begun. The days after Camilla's confession were not quiet ones. The San Juan Valley might have looked washed clean by the storm, but Mateo knew better. Tracks in the mud didn't vanish with sunlight, and whispers in town traveled faster than any horse. Still, work had to be done. At Los Alamos, fences leaned low, posts rotted, wire sagged. And Mateo Vargas was a man who measured trust not in words but in calluses. If Camilla meant what she said, that she would work, that she would not be a burden, then the land itself would test her. That morning, she came into the yard wearing one of his shirts again, sleeves rolled high, hair tied back with a strip of cloth. No hesitation in her stride, only the steady determination of someone who knew her presence was already costing him more than he'd admit aloud. "You keep your rules, senor," she said, meeting his eyes across the yard. "I brought my hands." Mateo only nodded. "Then let's see what they can do." They began with the hens. Camilla crouched low, careful fingers slipping beneath feathers, flinching once at a peck, before coming up with 3 warm eggs. Her smile, quick, unguarded, surprised him. "They don't peck as hard as I thought," she said. "That's because you moved slow," Mateo replied. "Animals feel your rush before they see it." Next came the cattle. The herd was still restless from the storm, and Mateo walked among them with the calm rhythm of a man who'd done this since boyhood. He showed her how to read the flick of an ear, the swish of a tail. She listened closely, asking sharp questions that made him glance twice. She wasn't filling silence. She was building a picture in her mind. By midday, dust clung to their skin, sweat streaked their brows, and Camilla's once smooth palms bore the first raw marks of rope and leather. But she didn't slow. It was then Ernesto rode up. The old vaquero swung down from his bay gelding, a coil of wire slung across his saddle. "Morning, señorita," he said, tipping his hat toward Camilla. "Morning," she answered, steady. Ernesto gestured toward a young roan in the smaller corral. The horse sidestepped, restless, green-broke, and fidgety. "You up for a test?" he asked. Camilla's chin lifted. "What kind?" "Bridle her. You can't force her, and you can't let her walk over you. Balance that line, and maybe you'll last out here." Mateo started to protest. This was too much, too soon. But Camilla was already stepping forward, rope in hand. It took 3 tries, a near step on her foot, and a moment where the roan nearly broke free. But she kept her voice low, her movement steady. Bit by bit, the horse yielded. The bit slid in, straps buckled. Camilla's cheeks were flushed, her breath sharp, but her eyes shone bright. Ernesto gave a small nod. "You've got more grit than some men I know." When he rode off, Mateo saw her watching the roan with something close to pride. He also saw her hands, red, raw, but unshaken. Later, they walked the east fence line. Wire sagged low, one post leaning like a drunk. Mateo drove the digger into the earth, Camilla hauling the new post into place. "Lean it toward the strain," he instructed. "I can feel it," she answered, shifting it without being told again. By the time the last wire was tightened, the sun had dipped low, throwing long shadows across the pasture. They headed back to the house, tools heavy in her arms. She refused to let him take them. On the porch, she set them down and stood a moment, looking out over the land. "It's different here," she murmured. "The air, the light. It's like the world has room to breathe." Mateo followed her gaze, but his eyes caught something else. A glint of metal near the north fence, half buried in mud. He bent, pulled it free. A silver cufflink, ornate, polished, engraved with a single letter, R. Revis. He closed his fist around it, silent. Trouble wasn't coming. It was already here. That night, the valley was restless. Camilla read aloud from a thin book of stories about women who refused to stay where they were put. Mateo played guitar, the low notes threading through her words, weaving firelight and shadow into something almost peaceful. Almost. But peace broke easily. Near midnight, Canelo, the old ranch dog, barked once, sharp and sudden. Then silence. Mateo rose, rifle in hand, staring into the black outline of the ridge. The wind carried smoke, not his own hearth. Someone was out there, watching. Inside, Camilla had gone still, her blanket clutched tight. Her eyes met Mateo's, and in them he saw the same truth he carried. This was only the beginning. At dawn, the sun came up hard and sharp, burning the valley gold. Mateo and Camilla rode out to mend the north line. 3 sections down, wire slack as dead snakes in the grass. They worked side by side under the punishing heat, Mateo driving posts, Camilla clearing debris, hauling wood until her palms split, blood mixing with dust. She bound her hands in cloth and kept going. "Blisters are just calluses being born," she muttered. Mateo gave a faint smile. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was claiming ground. But the valley didn't give ground easy. Around noon, a dust plume rose on the far trail. Too far to name faces, but close enough to tighten Mateo's gut. "Assume the worst," he said quietly. Camilla didn't falter. "Then we don't give them a weak point." By evening, the fence stood straight again, steel wire gleaming in the low amber light. Camilla leaned against a post, dirt streaked across her cheek, her shoulders square despite exhaustion. And from the ridge, two riders watched, silhouettes against the dying sun. They lingered just long enough to be seen, then turned, disappearing over the crest. Matteo said nothing until the house door shut behind them. "We'll keep rifles close," he told her. She met his gaze without flinching. "I'll be there." That night, Matteo sat by the window, the silver cufflink glinting on the table beside him. Outside, the valley was quiet, but he knew silence was only the skin of danger stretched tight. Camilla was no longer just a guest. She was part of the fight now. And Los Alamos, once a fortress of solitude, had become a beacon for protection, for choice, for defiance. And men like Rivas never let beacons burn long without trying to snuff them out. Los Alamos had become something it had never been before, a place of two voices instead of one. Camilla's presence had reshaped the air itself, turning silence into conversation, turning solitude into shared labor. But as fences straightened and cattle grew calmer, the valley whispered louder. Rivas was not a man to accept defiance. Matteo knew it. Ernesto knew it. Even Lucia, with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue, knew it. Trouble wasn't a question of if, but when. The market day came first. "Half the valley will be there," Matteo said as he hitched the wagon. "Good," Camilla answered. Her jaw was set, her hands steady in her lap. Better their eyes than their imaginations. She wore a plain calico dress Lucia had pressed into her hands, her hair tied back with nothing more than a strip of cloth. Simple. Honest. But it did nothing to dull the sharpness of her green eyes when they reached San Juan. The square was already alive, vendors shouting prices, the smell of roasted corn drifting through the warm air, children chasing one another through the dust. Matteo guided the wagon to the livery, where Ernesto leaned against a post, his face cut from stone. "Rivas is here," he said quietly. Camilla's spine stiffened. "Where?" "Across the square. Cantina. Came yesterday with two men. Been buying drinks, asking questions." Matteo's grip tightened on the reins. Avoiding him would only feed the flames. Facing him would set the tone. "Stay close," he told her. They moved slowly through the market, buying salt, coffee beans, fresh produce. Whispers rose in their wake. Every stall, every glance lingered a little too long on Camilla. Some curious, some sympathetic, some calculating. She met each look with steady eyes, refusing to shrink. It was outside the blacksmith's shop that the moment came. Rivas stepped into the sunlight. Tall, polished, hat brim gleaming. His boots had not known mud in years. And at his wrists, silver cufflinks, one twin to the piece Matteo kept hidden at Los Alamos. "Señor Vargas," Rivas said, his smile sharp but hollow. "I believe you have something of mine." His gaze slid past Matteo to Camilla. Or rather, someone. Matteo's jaw hardened, but Camilla stepped forward before he could speak. "I'm not yours, señor. I never was." The smile thinned, revealing steel beneath silk. "Your father signed a contract. His word, his consent, his blessing." "No vows," she cut in. "No ring. No consent from me. Whatever paper you wave means nothing here." The murmur of the crowd thickened, a circle forming. Matteo could feel the valley watching, weighing. "You're not welcome on my land," he said flatly. "You or your men." Rivas tilted his head, studying him like a hawk studies prey. "Careful, Vargas. This isn't about land, it's about property, and property once bought doesn't just walk away." Camilla's voice carried clear, cutting through the air. "A contract doesn't make a husband. It makes a jailer." The words struck harder than any bullet. Faces in the crowd shifted, some approving, some fearful, all listening. Rivas's smile faltered, calculation flickering in his eyes. Without another word, he stepped back, tipped his hat, and turned toward the cantina. "We'll speak again," he said. But Matteo saw it for what it was. Not retreat, but strategy. They left town under a dipping sun, the wagon bed heavy with supplies, the air heavier still with unspoken truth. Halfway up the pass, hoofbeats thundered. 3 horses blocked the road ahead, dust curling around polished boots and gleaming tack. Revas sat in the center, flanked by his men. The missing cufflink glinted in the sun, its twin waiting back on Mateo's table. "Morning," Mateo said flatly. "Road's closed," Revas replied easily, "until we settle a matter between us." "There is no matter," Camilla's voice cut sharp. "I'm not yours to settle." Revas leaned forward in the saddle, eyes dark. "Your father gave me his word, and I collect what's mine." Mateo's hand rested near the rifle laid across the wagon seat. "This here is my valley, and in my valley, a woman speaks for herself." One of Revas's men shifted, fingers brushing the butt of his revolver. The air tightened, brittle as glass. Then, a rifle cracked. The shot echoed through the pass, not aimed at flesh but at stone, a warning that rattled the canyon walls. Revas's men startled, horses sidestepping. Ernesto's voice carried from the ridge above. "Next one won't be for the air." The tension snapped like a pulled wire. Revas's jaw clenched, but his man's hand lifted from his gun. From behind, another figure appeared. Lucia, leading her horse with a basket slung across its saddle, her chin high. "Funny thing about this valley," she said, voice sharp as a blade. "Word travels faster than riders. Everyone in San Juan knows you're here." The second hired gun shifted uneasily, eyes darting between ridge and trail. Mateo eased the wagon forward a single step. "Move your horses." For a long moment, silence reigned. Then Revas yanked his reins hard, pulling his mount aside. His men followed, dust trailing like smoke. "We'll speak again," he repeated, but the edge in his voice had dulled. Only when the trail widened into open ground did Ernesto ride down from the ridge, rifle across his lap. "You picked a good place to stop," he said. "I wasn't stopping," Mateo replied, "just making sure they understood the rules." Lucia brought her horse alongside, eyes fierce with defiance. "You should have seen their faces when I told them the whole town was talking. Men like that hate losing control of the story." Camilla gave a faint smile, but her hands stayed knotted in her lap. "They'll try another way." "They might," Mateo said, "but now they know it won't be the easy way." Back at Los Alamos, the ranch felt different. The adobe walls stood the same, the fences still mended, the cattle grazing in their pastures. But the air itself had shifted. Quiet was no longer peace. It was only the pause between storms. That night, Mateo lit the lamp in the front room and left it burning longer than usual, rifle propped within arm's reach. Camilla sat by the fire, mending a tear in one of his shirts, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You're not afraid," he said quietly. She looked up, eyes steady. "I'm tired of being afraid. That's not the same thing." Her words settled deep into him, heavier than the silence. Outside, coyotes called across the valley. The stars burned cold over San Juan, and Mateo Vargas knew this fight was no longer about land or cattle or even reputation. It was about choice, about freedom, and about how far a man like Revas would go to break both. And Revas was not finished. Not yet. The pass was quiet now, but quiet had become a dangerous word in the San Juan Valley. Quiet meant only that Revas was choosing his ground, not that he was gone. Mateo Vargas knew this. So did Camila. At Los Alamos, every shadow felt longer, every coyote's cry sharper, every silence heavy with the question, when will he strike again? Yet life did not stop. Fences still needed mending, cattle needed tending, and dawn always came no matter what storm had raged the night before. For the first time in years, Mateo felt those dawns different, because someone else shared them. It was under the old mesquite tree, branches swaying above them, that Mateo finally spoke what he had buried in silence too long. "You came with the storm," he said, his voice rough. "But you stayed for the sunrise. I don't want to go back to how it was. Not ever." Camilla's lips curved into a small, unshaken smile. "And I've decided I like the sunrise better." From his pocket, Mateo drew out a plain silver band. Simple work, honest metal, nothing more. But it gleamed like the promise of something unbreakable. "Camilla Duarte," he said, steady as his own heartbeat. I've lived years thinking safety was enough, but you've shown me safety isn't living. Will you marry me? For a heartbeat, only the rustle of mesquite leaves answered. Then Camilla stepped forward, taking his hands. Her eyes held fire and peace all at once. Yes, Mateo Vargas. Not because you can keep me safe, but because you see me, and you stand beside me. Relief swept through him like a storm broken. He slid the band onto her finger, and it fit, as if it had always waited for her. Word spread quickly. By mid-morning, Lucia and Ernesto stood with them in the small whitewashed church of San Juan. No procession, no crowd. Only flowers in the air, the scent of warm lilies, and vows spoken without hesitation. Ernesto served as witness. Lucia smiled in quiet pride. They returned to Los Alamos that afternoon, neighbors bringing food, coffee, fresh bread, roasted goat. The adobe walls, once so silent, filled with laughter and clinking cups. For a moment, even the valley seemed to rest. But Mateo kept watch, eyes often drifting to the ridgelines. For he knew men like Rivas didn't vanish. They retreated, regrouped, waited. And he had seen the look in Rivas's eyes. This wasn't finished. That night, the ranch settled under starlight. Camilla sat on the porch beside him, the plain silver band gleaming on her finger. When he looked at me today, she said softly, I realized something. He never saw me as a person at all. Only something to own. Mateo nodded, his hand brushing hers. And now he knows there are people willing to fight to make sure he never does. They sat in silence, stars wheeling overhead, coyotes calling across the pasture. For the first time, Mateo did not feel the land as a fortress. He felt it as a home. Morning brought the kind of calm that felt almost unreal. The sky burned soft gold. The earth steamed where dew met sun. Camilla walked the yard with sleeves rolled, hair tied back, moving as though she had always belonged. This place, she said, pausing by the corral, it's not just yours anymore. It's ours. And it's not a cage. It's the opposite. Mateo looked at her, then out over the valley. The fences they'd mended together, the garden sprouting green, the cattle grazing steady, all of it spoke of something earned, not given. For years, he had thought freedom meant solitude, walls high enough to keep the world out. Now he understood it could mean something else: trust, choice, sharing both the risk and the sunrise. Yet even as the valley gleamed in morning light, shadows lingered. On a distant ridge, a faint glint caught his eye. Metal. Sunlight off glass, maybe binoculars, or maybe just his imagination. Either way, Mateo Vargas knew the truth. The San Juan Valley would always have storms. Riders would come. Enemies would test. But now he and Camilla would meet them together. And together, they had already chosen a freedom no man, no contract, no threat could buy or steal. If this story struck your heart, if you felt the storm, the defiance, and the fight for freedom, don't let it end here. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next Wild West tale. Share this with a friend who loves stories of resilience and justice, because the San Juan Valley still has many storms to face and more voices to rise against them. The San Juan Valley would never be the same. What began with a storm pounding the earth and a stranger's desperate plea had become something larger, an oath forged in firelight, in sweat, in danger. Mateo Vargas, the loner rancher who once believed silence was safety, now stood beside a woman who had defied her father, her jailer, and the weight of an entire world that called her property. Camilla had not come to Los Alamos seeking comfort. She had come seeking freedom. And in choosing to stay, rolling wire, feeding cattle, standing tall before Rivas, she carved that freedom into the very bones of the valley. But freedom was never final. It was a choice made again and again, each dawn, each night, each storm that rolled over the ridges. Rivas was not gone, only watching, waiting. The glint of metal on the horizon proved as much. Yet this time, Los Alamos was not a fortress of one man's solitude. It was a home of two, bound not by fear but by will. The storm had brought her to his door. The sunrise had kept her there. And together, they would face whatever the valley sent next.